Google just made it possible to spin up a full AI agent with basically one API call. That is the good news. The less cuddly news is that the runtime, the sandbox, and a chunk of your control now live inside Google too. So what are we talking about here? On May 19th, 2026, Google launched managed agents in the Gemini API. This matters to developers, indie builders, and product teams trying to ship AI workflows without spending a week building the plumbing first. And my take is simple. This is useful, but only if you treat it like rented infrastructure, not magical intelligence dust. Here is the official claim. Google says managed agents let you spin up an agent that can reason, use tools, execute code in an isolated Linux environment, browse the web, and keep files and state around for follow-up calls. Google also says you can extend the setup with markdown files, like agents.md and skill.md, which is honestly a very developer-brained detail, and for once, I mean that as a compliment. This launch matters because it removes the part of agent building that most demos politely skip, the unsexy execution layer. Not the prompt, not the model, the part where you manage sandboxes, tool permissions, state, retries, and why did this subprocess decide to become a philosopher instead of finishing the task? Google is also nudging developers toward a more agent-shaped API stack overall. In the Gemini docs, new projects are pushed toward the Interactions API, which is pitched as the recommended primitive for agentic workflows and server-side state management. That is a meaningful shift. This is not just, here's another tool. It is Google saying the runtime is becoming part of the product. Now for the part a lot of coverage is glossing over. The main value here is not that agents got smarter. The main value is that infrastructure got cheaper to try. If you were already convinced your workflow needs browsing, code execution, files, and multi-step state, then yes, this can collapse a lot of setup work. But if your workflow is basically read form, classify text, write result, then congratulations, you may not need an agent. You may need self-respect and a queue. That is the decision mistake I want people to avoid. Managed agents are not the new default for every automation. They are best when the task is messy, open-ended, and hard to pre-script. Think research agents, debugging helpers, file-heavy investigation flows, or a tool-using assistant that needs to recover context over several turns. They are much less compelling when the task is narrow, deterministic, and easy to verify with normal software patterns. So here's the practical framework. Before you adopt managed agents, ask 3 questions. First, does this task actually need a real execution environment? If the model never needs to touch code, files, a browser, or long-running tool state, then a standard API call plus your own application logic is probably enough. Second, does this workflow benefit from persistent state across turns? Google is explicitly selling the idea that you can resume an environment with files and state intact. That is powerful for iterative workflows. It is also unnecessary overhead for one-shot tasks.
Third, is the workflow messy enough that renting the runtime is worth the trade-off in control? Because convenience is not free. You are giving the platform more ownership over execution, observability, and some of the weird operational edges that used to live in your own stack. This is exactly why the community reaction is interesting. The immediate developer response was not just hype, it was comparison. People started treating this as another entry in the agents as a service race. That tells you what advanced users care about: portability, trust boundaries, cost shape, and whether your architecture still makes sense if you ever need to switch providers. That is a much better conversation than, wow, the demo typed into a terminal. There is also a security angle you should not ignore. The anti-gravity execution layer already has people discussing browser agent risks and prompt injection-style data exposure. That does not mean the product is unusable. It means you should be very sober about where you point it. Internal systems, sensitive files, and irreversible actions deserve a higher bar than the launch video looked clean. My opinionated recommendation is this. Use managed agents when you want to prototype or ship a workflow whose complexity lives in the execution loop. Do not use them to avoid making architecture decisions. Keep your domain logic, evaluation criteria, and product-specific rules outside the magic as much as possible. Let the managed runtime handle the messy hands. Do not let it become your whole brain. If you want the shortest version possible, here it is. Managed agents are worth trying when you need all 3 of these: tool use, state, and messy multi-step execution. If you only need one of those, or honestly, none of them, simpler is better, cheaper, and easier to trust. The hottest AI architecture trend still loses to boring software when the task is boring software. So yes, Google shipped something real here. The useful behavior change is not go wrap everything in an agent. It is stop paying the orchestration tax only when the orchestration is actually the hard part. That is the catch, and also the opportunity. Because the headline is one API call. The real story is knowing when not to make it.